13 years old, the army was led by his guardian Bairam Khan and Hemchandra Vikramaditya of Revari or Hemu, the most important minister and military general of the Suri dynasty. Babur was succeeded by Humayun, who was defeated by Afghan invader Sher Shah Suri, set up the rule of the Suri dynasty, 1540 to 1955. In 1555, Humayun defeated Suris but then died in 1556, and now Hemu recaptured power. Therefore, the Second Battle of Panipat was fought by Akbar to establish the Mughal Empire in India. Mughal Emperor Chronology, 6:48 p.m. Babur, 1526 to 1930. Humayun, 1530 to 1940. Akbar, 1556 to 1605. Jahangir, 1605 to 1627. Shahjahan, 1628 to 1958. Aurangzeb, 1658 to 1707. Bahadur Shah, 1707 to 1712. Jahandar Shah, 1712 to 1713. Farrukhsiyar, 1713 to 2019. Muhammad Shah, 1719 to 1748. Ahmad Shah Bahadur, 1748 to 1754. Alamgir II, 1754 to 1959. Shah Alam, 1760 to 1806. Akbar II, 1806 to 1837. Bahadur Shah Jafar, 1837 to 1857. Mansabdari system, 7:11 p.m. It was the military bureaucracy system of the Mughals established by the Akbar. That is, officials had dual functions of civil and military functions. Mansab is a post office and Mansabdar is the holder or occupant of Mansabs. There were two types of Mansabdars on basis of the mode of salary. Nakdi Mansabdar. They were paid a salary in cash. Jagirdar Mansabdar. They were paid in the form of allocating a Jagir. The land revenue from the Jagirs, land, went to the Jagirdar. Jagir is a land whose land revenue goes to Jagirdar and Jagirdar is the holder of Jagir. Jagir was of two types. Tankha Jagirs. These Jagirs could be transferred from one to another Mansabdar, could be taken away from the Mansabdar by the king. All of the revenue goes to Mansabdar. Watan Jagirs. The word Watan means hereditary. It was given permanently to a person and becomes hereditary Jagir. It is non-transferable. 10% of land revenue from Watan Jagir went to the king as tribute peshkash. As here king gave up the right to take away Jagir, therefore needs to be compensated, and tribute acted as Watan Jagirdar, recognizing the sovereign authority of the king. The criteria for becoming Mansabdar was lineage, family background. Every Mansabdar had a dual rank. Zat. It was a personal rank. Samvar. It is the number of horsemen a Mansabdar is required to maintain for the king. For example, Zat is equal to 3000 and Samvar is equal to 1500, then net rank is equal to 4500. The emoluments of Mansabdar were equal to his salary and allowance for the maintenance of the army as per his Samvar. More important nobles were Jagirdar Mansabdar and less important ones were Nakdi Mansabdars. Watan Jagirs were given to those who were very powerful Mansabdars. Corrupt Mansabdar would not maintain an army as per Samvar, therefore would try to make personal money to be ideally spent on the army or over-extracted land revenue from Jagir. Mughal emperors are dependent on Mansabdars for the maintenance of the army. Therefore, in the Mansabdari system, a give-and-take relationship existed between the king and Mansabdar. The king gave Mansab and Jagir, and in return Mansabdar gave his loyalty and maintained the army of the king. Therefore, there existed personal loyalty, and if the king does not give the desired Mansabs and Jagirs, then it may lead to disloyalty towards the king. The topic of the next class, Khalisa land and land revenue system. Modern Indian History Class 02. Khalisa land, 5:17 p.m. The land of the kingdom was Jagirs, transferable and non-transferable, or Tankha and Watan. Khalisa land was the royal land and the land revenue of this land went to king. The land revenue system of the Mughals, 5:28 p.m. Zamindars collected land revenue and had police duties, and in return for their service, they got a commission. Therefore, Zamindar was not the owner of the land from which he collected land revenue. Zamindar had Watan, hereditary, right of revenue collection. He would collect land revenue from others' land but would also pay land revenue from his lands, which were called milkiyat. Nankal lands, these were the land of zamindars, which were declared tax-free, revenue-free in return for providing service of revenue collection. Primary zamindars, they collected land revenue from peasants, ryots, actual cultivators. He also collected Awadh, additional levies, over and above the land revenue from peasants. Ryots paid land revenue as per the recorded percent in pattas, documents, therefore patta system prevented over-extraction. Intermediary zamindars, they collected land revenue from the primary zamindars, then passed it on to Jagirdars or the state. Peasants were of two kinds. Khudkasht, those with occupancy rights. They could not be removed from the land they cultivated. They kept occupancy rights as customary traditional rights since they had cultivated a particular piece of land continuously for a long time. Pahikashts, they were landless, rightless peasants. They did not have occupant rights as were vagrant peasants, that is cultivated different lands in different seasons. Ijaradari system, 6:18 p.m. Here the right to collect the revenue was auctioned to the highest bidder. Those who won the auction were called Ijaradars. They were men of money like merchants and moneylenders who were outsiders to the traditional rural economy. They would collect land revenue but may also collect taxes on shopkeepers and merchants over and above for winning the auction. He may pay revenue in advance to Jagirdar or the state and later collect it from the areas, or may pay partially in advance and rest later. If he failed to submit the agreed amount, then the right to collect revenue could be reauctioned. Jahandar Shah introduced the Ijaradari system and it grew during Aurangzeb and spread rapidly in the 18th century. It was introduced by Jahandar Shah, 1712 to 2013, in Punjab and Bengal, later in Awadh and Hyderabad. Farrukhsiyar introduced it even in Khalisha land. Under the British, it was introduced as a farming system in 1772 in Bengal, and Ijaradar was called a revenue farmer who won the right to collect land revenue in the auction. The Ijaradari system was introduced when there was a shortfall in revenue collection or when the Jagirdar of the state wanted to maximize land revenue collection. The decline of Mughals, 6:53 p.m. Role of Aurangzeb continues warfare. Mughal Empire reached its territorial peak. However, seeds of decline were also sown during Aurangzeb's reign. Aurangzeb engaged in continuous warfare for roughly 40 years, which drained resources for the Mughal Empire due to the high cost of war. These wars also hurt overland trade due to a decline in production and law and order instability. These wars also increased the economic burden on Mansabdars, who were required to maintain an army for the emperor. Therefore, wars contributed to the economic decline of the Mughals. Aurangzeb wanted to capture the whole of Deccan and annexed Golconda in 1687 and Bijapur in 1685, the two autonomous Muslim kingdoms. However, he failed to defeat the Marathas convincingly, and by 1705 Marathas began winning. After 1707, they reversed most territorial gains of Aurangzeb in first half of the 18th century. Therefore, in the end these wars proved futile. Therefore, Marathas became reasons for the military and territorial decline of the Mughals. The religiously decisive policy of Aurangzeb. They alienated the mass, for example, the application of jizya on non-Muslim, an additional tax, and not preparing temples, and reducing the allocation of land to temples. He also demolished some important Hindu temples. Aurangzeb executed important leaders which contributed to the alienation of the masses. For example, the 9th Guru Tegh Bahadur for Sikhs was executed in 1675, and Sambhaji, elder son of Shivaji, was executed after 3 weeks of torture in 1689. Both also refused conversion to Islam. Institutional failure, governance failure. Impersonal loyalty could not develop in the Mansabdari system, which was the core of the Mughal system. Therefore, what existed was personal loyalty to the king, which is a Patan, Mughal emperor, client, Mansabdars, relationship, that is a give-and-take relationship, where patron gave mansabs and jagirs, and in return, clients gave loyalty and an army. Post-Aurangzeb, weak Mughal emperors failed to maintain the balance of power in the Mughal court among Mansabdars. Therefore, failed to keep Mansabdars under control. If the king was unable to satisfy Mansabdars with desired jagirs and mansabs, then disloyalty among Mansabdars took root. The topic of the next class, the decline of Mughals, to continue. Modern Indian History Class 03. The decline of the Mughals, continued, 5:05 p.m. Military weakness. Mughal state was a military state, not a nation state. A nation is people who feel, while the country is a territory. The state is an organization that manages the affairs of the nation and country. A state organization created by the people. Nation is nation state. Poor military due to a lack of technological and organizational reforms. Weak war commanders, especially after Aurangzeb. Military corruption. Example of non-maintenance of the army as per Samvar due to disaffection and the Jagirdari crisis. Fractionalism, group politics. Post-Aurangzeb, there were continuous succession disputes and factionalism increased. This also led to competition between different groups of Mansabdars, like Irani group Shias, and had Persian origin. Humayun took the help of the Persians for recapturing power in 1555, thus their presence as Mansabdars. Turani group from the same origin as the Mughals. Hindustani groups converted Indian Muslims. Deccani groups nobles of Golconda and Bizapur who were made Mansabdars by Aurangzeb after defeating Golconda in 1687 and Bizapur in 1685. Hindus, mainly Rajputs. The able Mansabdars acted selfishly, and instead of strengthening the central authority, they focused on carving out their principalities. Jagirdari crisis of 18th century, 5:53 p.m. Aurangzeb annexed Golconda in 1687 and Bizapur in 1685, and then nobles of these kingdoms were co-opted as Mansabdars and came to be known as the Deccani group. However, Aurangzeb converted most of the land in these kingdoms into the Khalisa land as he wanted to fund his future warfare against Marathas. Therefore, the number of Mansabdars, while land under Jagirdari did not. Emperor post-Aurangzeb appointed more and more Mansabdars for political reasons, that is to win the support of different groups of Mansabdars, either to come to power or to stay in power. There was also inequity among Mandabaras, as 5% of Mansabdars controlled 61% of Jagirdari lands, therefore there was insecurity among smaller Mansabdars. In the 18th century, there was inflation in luxurious goods due to high exports to Europe by the European trading companies, as a Wazir Nizam tried but failed to convince the elite Mansabdars to redistribution of Jagirs. Now the smaller Mansabdars found it hard to maintain the lifestyle, adding to insecurity. Impact of the Jagirdari crisis of the 18th century. Many Mansabdars stayed Jagirless for years. Insecurity among Jagiradars due to the frequent transfer of Jagirs to other Mansabdars, which is the insecurity of tenure of holding Jagir. Therefore now there was increased oppression of riots and primary zamindars as Mansabdars wanted to extract as much land revenue as possible from Jagirs. Now there is a greater spread of the Ijaradari system as Mansabdar Jagirdar tried to maximize his earnings. Due to insecurity of tenure, no incentive for Jagirdar Mansabdar to invest in the productivity of the Jagirs, therefore hurting the income of riots. Peasant revolts in the 18th century were the product of the Jagirdari crisis, and they were led by zamindars, who were traditional leaders of rural society. For example, the Jat kingdom set up by Churaman Jat, Izmindar, was a product of peasant revolt, therefore Jagirdari crisis hurt political stability. The Jagirdari crisis led to military corruption by Mansabdars, therefore contributing to the military weakness. Group politics increased as Mansabdars competed for Jagirs even more. The Mughal state was a military state, and when the military weakened, the state weakened. The proof of the decline of the Mughal Empire, 717 p.m. Jahandar Shah came to power after executing the father of Farrukhsiyar, who came to power with the help of the Sayyid brothers of the Hindustani group. But then Farrukhsiyar wanted to free himself of control of the Sayyid brothers, therefore planning to get rid of the Sayyid brothers, who then aligned with Marathas to execute Farrukhsiyar in 1719 and placed Muhammad Shah in power as puppet emperor. Nizamul Mulk of the Turni group allied with the Irani group and defeated the Sayyid brothers and restored the status of Muhammad Shah. From 1720 to 1924, Nizam served as Wazir. Mughal post-Aurangzeb are called later Mughals, who were weak rulers with weak personalities and not interested in administration. For example, Muhammad Shah came to be known as Rangila as he spent the most time in leisure, detached from political and administrative issues. Beginning in 1705, Marathas began defeating the Mughals. In 1719, they were successful in placing Muhammad Shah as puppet ruler and extracted some gains. In 1737, Peshwa Bazi Rao plundered Delhi and kept Muhammad Shah captive temporarily. Then in 1738, Marathas defeated a large Mughal army led by Nizam. And then in 1739, they signed the Treaty of Bhopal where they extracted Subha of Malwa and sovereignty over all territory between river Chambal and Narmada. Invasion of Nadir Shah. Reasons for invasion. In Afghanistan, Nadir Shah's opponents were given protection by Mughals in Mughal-controlled territory. His messenger was held captive in Delhi. Nadir Shah wanted to plunder Indian wealth. Reasons for Nadir Shah's win. Mughals were military weak. Example, Marathas defeated a large Mughal army in 1738. Lack of military reforms, technology and organization. Military corruption by Mansabdars due to the Jagirdari crisis. Saadat Ali Khan, Nawab of Awadh, switched sides to fight alongside Nadir Shah when she was not made Mir Bakshi and the Mansab was given to Nizam, therefore factionalism played a role. The better military leadership of Nadir Shah. The decisive was the Battle of Karnal in 1739, after which Nadir Shah became Emperor of India for 2 months and Muhammad Shah was taken as a prisoner. Saadat Ali Khan committed suicide when insulted post-victory by Nadir Shah. The topic for the next class, Dictation of Impact of the Nadir Shah Invasion. Modern Indian History Class 04. Impact of Nadir Shah Invasion, 5:10 p.m. Huge loss of prestige for the Mughals. Muhammad Shah lost the respect of Mansabdars, as did not stand up for his dignity despite insults by Nadir Shah. Lost prestige among people as Nadir Shah massacred 2 lakh civilians in Delhi, therefore people realized that the Mughals cannot protect them. Loss of military prestige as it was a huge military defeat, soon after a defeat by Marathas in 1738. Huge economic loss and now the Mughals could not maintain a strong army. Nadir Shah took away Peacock's throne that had Kohinoor in it, a huge loot of elephants and workers, and a huge wealth worth 100 crores. Therefore Mansabdars were also drained of wealth as they had to contribute to the loot. It is not a coincidence that Nizam left Delhi permanently for Hyderabad in 1740, also fear of Marathas west of Hyderabad. Now chances of foreign invasion increased, 1748-1 sent Afghan invasion by Abdali, 1756 second Afghan invasion by Abdali, 1799-3 RD Afghan invasion by Zaman Shah. More proofs of the decline of the Mughals, 5:22 p.m. First Afghan invasion failed, however, the fear of future invasion remained, therefore in 1752 Mughals came under the protection of Marathas, who were now the top power in India. Shahu recognized the authority of the Mughal emperor, accepted a mansab, and promised to maintain the army as Mansabdars. Alamgir too was a puppet brought to power by Marathas by interfering in succession disputes. Therefore, by the mid-18th century Marathas were top power along with strong autonomous states, that is successor states of Bengal, Hyderabad, and Awadh, rebel states like Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, and Afghans, and already autonomous states like Rajput, Mysore, and Travancore. While the Mughal emperor's authority was limited to Delhi and Agra. Successor states, 5:51 p.m. They included Bengal, Murshid Quli Khan, Hyderabad, Nizamul Mulk, and Awadh, Saadat Ali Khan. Within the Mughal Empire, certain powerful nobles established themselves as autonomous power centers by carving out successor states within the Mughal Empire, that is, they ruled autonomously but never formally broke ties with the Mughal Empire. This was because of personal ambitions in Delhi politics, that is, a desire for greater influence outside their principalities by holding positions like Wazir, Mir Bakshi, etc. They also wanted the legitimacy of the Mughal Empire for better trade with the rest of the Mughal Empire and the potential of military help from the rest of the Mughal Empire. These nobles, after getting appointed as governors, consolidated power by ending the system of checks and balances, therefore leading to over-concentration of power. They ensured that their relatives and loyalists were appointed to important positions, mansabs like Dewan, Deputy Subdar, War Commander, and other important positions. For example, Saadat Ali Khan got his son-in-law Safdarjung appointed as Deputy Subdar and Murshid Quli Khan was already Dewan when he was appointed as Subdar Nawab Governor of Bengal Subha. They gathered the support of economically powerful sections like intermediary zamindars, Ijaradars, revenue farmers, merchants, moneylenders, and bankers by not harassing them, not applying arbitrary taxes, by proving law and order stability that was good for trade, by providing security of property, distributing mansabs, which was a new feature as traditionally men of money were not made emissabdars and nobles based on lineage dominated the Mansabdari system traditionally. Therefore, there was a rise of men of money in successor states, for example. By 1727, 15 intermediary zamindars were responsible for 50% of land revenue collection. The house of Jagat Seth became a strong financial power, and the Dutch described Jagat Seth as the richest banker in the world. Jagat Seth controlled the royal mint, acted as a banker for the Nawab, loaned money to Nawab, and financed trade all across India, loaned money to merchants. In Hyderabad, the core feature of the Mansabdari system changed as men of money now dominated the Mansabdari system. They converted Tankha Jagir into Watan Jagir to get the support of pre-existing Mansabdars. Example, in Hyderabad, core feature of Tankha Jagir vanished as many were converted into Watan Jagir. They established effective revenue administration, and this increased their monetary power. For example, Murshid Quli Khan was known for its effective revenue administration and did detailed surveys for land revenue assessment, that is, identify the soil productivity, irrigation available, crops sown, past trends of land revenue collection, and area under production, before demanding land revenue. Then they began ruling autonomously as distributed mansabs and jagirs without permission or reference to the Mughal emperor, and behaved autonomously in important matters like matters of war and peace, signing treaties with neighbors, domestic policies, etc. They gradually reduced financial reporting of revenue collected to Delhi, that is, books of account were not sent. They also stopped sending revenue regularly to Delhi and later also reduced the amount of revenue and finally stopped it. Finally, these nobles established their dynastic rule, and therefore Mughal emperor lost power in the successor state, and the appointment of Mansabdars is important. The Mughal emperor lost power to act as a patron, and therefore even the patent-client relationship that led to personal loyalty instead of impersonal loyalty also ended as the client itself became patent. However, power was not centralized and was shared between different segments, Nawab Subdar and men of money, and traditional Masabdars. Rebel states, 7:27 p.m. Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, and Afghans. Marathas. Maratha kingdom was founded by Chhatrapati Shivaji in 1674, declared himself Chhatrapati, legally independent from Mughal unlike successor states in second half of the 17th century by fighting against Bijapur and Aurangzeb. Periods in Maratha polity. 1680-1719 period of instability after the death of Shivaji in 1680. 1719-1761 period of stability and growth. 1761 onwards period of decline with a temporary revival in the 1770s. 1774 onwards British influence in Maratha polity begins. 1680 onwards there was turmoil due to the death of Shivaji and the continuous warfare of Aurangzeb. After the release of Shahu in 1707, there was a civil war. During the civil war, Deshmukh and Maratha Sardars frequently switched sides between Tarbahi, Shahu, and Mughals. The important role of 6th Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath was a very able leader and helped Shahu gather the support of powerful sections, support of a strong Brahman banking family, support of new independent Maratha Sardars. Therefore, by 1719 Shahu emerged victorious, leading to a period of stability and growth. The dispute with Shivaji too was settled via the Treaty of Varna in 1731, where he was given Kolhapur. Peshwa was PM Wazir and was one of the 8 ministers in the Council of Chhatrapati. Maratha Sardars. Scindia of Gwalior, Bhonsle of Nagpur, Holkar of Indore, Gaikwad of Baroda. The topic of the next class, the family tree of Marathas. Modern Indian History Class 05. Maratha continued, 5:04 p.m. Military rise of Marathas. In 1719, Marathas allied with the Syed brothers of the Hindustani group to remove Farrukhsiyar and place Muhammad Shah as a puppet ruler. In return they got independent status in Maharashtra. Shahu recognized the authority of the Mughal emperor. Therefore, independent here means autonomous like successor state, that is not legally but in practice. Chauth, 1/4 of revenue of Malwa and Gujarat. Chauth and Deshmukhi, 1/10 of the revenue of 6 Mughal provinces of Deccan. However, Nizam got rid of the Syed brothers and restored the status of Muhammad Shah, and then became governor of Hyderabad in 1724. Therefore, Marathas lost the gains made. In 1827 to 1928, Bazi Rao sent an army to Gujarat and extracted the right to 60% of the revenue of Gujarat from its Mughal governor. In 1728, Bazi Rao defeated Hyderabad and regained Chauth and Saydeshmukhi of Deccan. Chauth is 1/4 of the revenue and Saydeshmukhi is 1/10 of the revenue. Chauth was a tool of foreign policy and only applied to non-Maratha territory in return for Maratha protection, that is, the protected state gave 1/4 of revenue to prevent future Maratha attacks on itself. When the protected state could not pay Chauth anymore, it lost protection and was then annexed by Marathas. Saydeshmukhi was introduced by Chhatrapati Shivaji. Deshmukh gave 1/10 of revenue as a symbol of recognizing his authority as Saydeshmukh, head of Deshmukh. Saydeshmukhi can be applied to Maratha and non-Maratha territories. In 1731, Marathas defeated a joint attack by Nizam and the local chiefs of Gujarat. In 1729, captured Malwa and reached Rajasthan. In 1736, defeated Portuguese and Ethiopian Muslims at the Konkan coast. This signified the naval strength of the Marathas. In 1737, Bazarov plundered Delhi and kept Muhammad Fhh temporarily captive. In 1738, Marathas defeated a large Mughal army led by Nizam and then signed the Treaty of Bhopal in 1739, where they got Subah of Malwa and sovereignty over all territory between river Chambal and Narmada. During 1745 to 1951, Raghuji Bhonsle of Nagpur regularly attacked Bengal Subah and forced Alivardi Khan to give Orissa and Chauth of Bengal and Bihar. Chauth was paid until 1757, after which EIC controlled Bengal Subah and Marathas lost Orissa to the British EIC in the Second Anglo-Maratha War in 1803 to 2005. In 1751, Nana Sahib attacked Hyderabad territory in Konkan and signed the Treaty of Bhalke, where Salabat Jung gave Khandesh to Marathas. From 1751 onwards, Marathas regularly attacked Rajputs. They extracted annual tributes and interfered in succession, but could never conclusively defeat Rajputs, therefore did not try for annexation. In 1752, Mughals came under Maratha protection due to fear of Afghan invasions. Afghan invasion in 1748, second in 1756 to 1961, and third in 1799. In 1754, Marathas interfered in Mughal succession and placed Alamgir II as puppet emperor. In 1765, Marathas defeated Mysore and extracted tribute. In 1766, Hyderabad gave northern circles to EIC in return for military protection from Marathas and Mysore. In 1795, Battle of Kharda was the last battle between the Marathas and Hyderabad, where the Marathas emerged victorious. EIC stayed neutral as it also had a military alliance with the Marathas since the Treaty of Salbai in 1782. In 1798, Hyderabad became the first state to sign a subsidiary subordinate alliance with EIC, where it lost control over foreign policy and military to EIC and return got military protection of EIC. Marathas failed to defeat Sikhs. Therefore, by the mid-18th century, Marathas emerged as the top power in India, and it was the Third Battle of Panipat that halted their rise, and thereafter their decline began. Third Battle of Panipat, 1761, 6:56 p.m. It was fought between Ahmad Shah Abdali Durrani. He was the founder of modern Afghanistan and of the Durrani Empire, a trusted commander of Nadir Shah, declared himself king of Afghanistan after Nadir Shah's death, began first Afghan invasion in 1748 that failed, began second Afghan invasion that concluded in Third Battle of Panipat. He was supported by Siuzaud Dwala, Nawab of Awadh, who wanted to weaken Marathas. Najib-ud-Dawla, ruler of Rohilkhand. Farrukhabad under Bangash Pathan. Jats under Surajmal temporarily supported Marathas. Mughals, only technically, as Mughals came under Maratha protection due to fear of Afghan invasion. Thus mainly only Marathas were on the other side. Reasons for the battle. The conflict between two rising neighbouring powers, that is Marathas in India and Abdali in Afghanistan. In 1756, Afghan raided northern India and Abdali appointed his son Timur Shah as governor of Punjab. Nana Sahib sent his brother who defeated and removed Timur from Lahore. This was the peak of the Maratha Empire. Now Nana Sahib thought of making his son Vishwas Rao Emperor of India. Those Mughals who were anti-Maratha had earlier requested the help of Abdali. Attacks by Abdali culminated in the Third Battle of Panipat. Why Abdali won? A stronger alliance by Abdali. Awadh supported Abdali as it wanted to weaken the Marathas who were its rivals, therefore declined to support Marathas. Rohillas and Bangash Pathans expected greater influence in North India if Afghani Abdali won. 6. Rajputs and Jats stayed neutral due to constant plundering in the past by Marathas, therefore Marathas failed to convince other Indian powers. A higher number of soldiers, 60,000 versus 50,000. Disunity between Maratha Sardars, for example, Bhonsle of Nagpur didn't fight, therefore factionalism played a role. The better military leadership of Abdali. Abdali's forces had better artillery, for example, horses-mounted guns. Abdali's forces were successful in cutting off the supply lines between Delhi and Panipat, and therefore famine-like conditions existed in the Maratha camp in Panipat with no food for men and no fodder for horses, while Afghan supply routes stayed functional. Maratha's hallmark strategy of guerrilla warfare was not suited for the vast plain fields of Panipat. Impact of loss. Marathas lost important leaders like Sadashiv Rao Bhau and Vishwas Rao died fighting, while Nana Sahib died within weeks of the Third Battle of Panipat. Now factionalism began in Maratha politics, leading to the weakening of central authority. Marathas got militarily weakened as they lost important leaders and 50,000 men. Abdali returned to Afghanistan with loot as there was a revolt in his army in Afghanistan. An anti-Abdali military general planned a coup in Afghanistan. Thus Third Battle of Panipat decided who will not rule India and not who will rule India. Now there was a vacuum of power at the center that was filled later by EIC by defeating multiple regional wars of India one by one. Why were so many empires shaking battles fought in Panipat? 7:56 p.m. Battles were not fought for the city of Panipat but because this region was the gateway to Delhi. Anyone who wanted to capture Delhi from the west had to pass through Khyber Pass in Afghanistan and then enter India via Punjab. For the ruler of Delhi strategically it was best to stop the enemy at the gates, that is in this region having Panipat, Karnal, Kurukshetra, and Thanesar. This region had vast fields suitable for large armies. This region had many warrior classes making military recruitment easy for the army. The region was agriculturally productive and close to Delhi, therefore easy supplies for fighting men. Suitable weather for long battles. Muhammad of Ghazni fought in Thanesar in 1014 and his empire extended from Iran to Pakistan by 1030. Ghori fought Prithviraj in Thanesar in 1191. First Battle of Panipat led to the end of the Delhi Sultanate and the establishment of the Mughal Empire. Second Battle of Panipat led to the re-establishment of the Mughal Empire. The Battle of Karnal led to Nadir Shah becoming emperor for 60 days. The Third Battle of Panipat prevented Maratha from becoming an all-Indian power. The topic of the next class, Maratha Administration. Modern Indian History Class 06. Maratha Administration, 5:07 p.m. Maratha's empire was divided into Swarajya and Samrajya. After Shah, Peshwa became the effective ruler as Sahu delegated too much power to the Peshwa. Shah had an adopted son. A treaty formally gave effective power to Peshwa. Peshwa's capital was in Pune and his secretariat was called Hajur Daftar. There existed a system of checks and balances on the governor as Deshmukh revenue collectors had dual reporting to the governor as well the Peshwa, therefore enabling Peshwa to verify books of accounts submitted by the governor. Samrajya was territory outside Maharashtra brought into the Maratha Empire by Maratha Sardars. Therefore was controlled by Maratha Sardars who ruled Samrajya autonomously. However, they did not set up effective rules on the ground in the whole of Samrajya. Peshwa had a council of 12 ministers. Swaraj was divided into Sarkar's provinces and the office of governor was auctioned. Patil village headmen and Deshmukh revenue collectors had Vatan rights. Patils were responsible for executive, police, judicial, and revenue functions at the village level. Therefore the concentration of power in Patil. Sources of revenue were land revenue and taxes on trade, license fees, and judicial proceeds in form of Nazrana from the victorious party and Jurmana from the losing party. Further to increase revenue and peasant welfare, dams and canals were built and loans were given at cheap interest rates. Also, there was effective supervision of revenue collectors so they do not oppress peasants. Maratha judiciary. A clear hierarchy existed from the village panchayat up to the Peshwa and the final decision was of Peshwa. However, as far as possible he respected the decision of village panchayats. Ancient religious texts acted as laws, example Dharmashastra. There was a rule of law as even the highest authorities and men of money were punished. Policing was as effective as the London police with a very good network of information collection and existed a rule of law. Maratha military. The major force was horse-mounted army with a focus on light cavalry, which was important for Marathas' guerrilla warfare tactics, which was a highly effective strategy of surprising the enemy with a swift attack, therefore creating shock and awe. The navy was modernized with the help of the French, in exchange for money and Britain-France rivalry. Why Marathas could not establish an all-Indian empire? The rise of the Peshwa at expense of Chhatrapati increased the chances of fractionation in Maratha polity as strong Maratha Sardars asserted their autonomy more against the Peshwa. The Third Battle of Panipat weakened the central authority of Peshwa as Marathas lost important leaders and now young and inexperienced Peshwas came to power, therefore increasing factionalism. Succession disputes increased factionalism. Raghunath Rao got Narayan Rao killed in a conspiracy and then he was himself overthrown in Barbhai conspiracy by Nana Fadnavis, an important minister in Peshwa's council. Fractionalism led to British interference in Marathas' polity, for example. The First Anglo-Maratha War began when Raghunath Rao went to EIC in Bombay for military help to regain Peshwarship. Later the Second Anglo-Maratha War began when Bazi Rao signed a subsidiary alliance with EIC to regain Peshwarship after he was defeated and removed by Holkar of Indore in 1802. Power could not be properly centralized as Maratha Sardars always stayed autonomous within the Maratha Empire. With Swarajya also local assemblies of Watan right holders exerted influence and pressure on Peshwa. Therefore Maratha Empire was a confederacy where power was shared between Peshwa and Maratha Sardars and proper centralized rule didn't exist. In Samrajya, not all areas were brought under effective rule by Maratha Sardars and the focus outside Maharashtra was limited to extracting Chart and Sardeshmukhi. Therefore, Marathas establishing central rule over the whole of India was a distant milestone, especially after the Third Battle of Panipat. 6-8, 706 p.m. Guru Nanak Dev Ji set up a Sikh Panth around the 16th century and was a contemporary of Babur. Mughals began having problems with the Sikh community and they demanded political autonomy. 9th Guru Tegh Bahadur was executed in Delhi in 1685. Sikhs wanted to establish their state in and around Anandpur in Shivalik foothills, which was under the Shivalik hill chief. After this 10th Guru Govind Singh set up a Brotherhood of Khalsa in 1699, a military organization to defend Sikh Panth from the Mughals and to achieve the goal of the Sikh state. The Sikh community was dominated by Khatris, traders and Sikh gurus who came from this community, and Jats, peasants who had a military culture, and dominated the Khalsa army whose influence increased. Thus it was decided there won't be an 11th Guru and authority would lay in Guru Granth Sahib to bring parity between the two communities. In 1707, after the death of Aurangzeb, Bahadur Shah agreed to give Anandpur but then again allied with Shivalik hill chiefs. In 1708 Guru Govind Singh was murdered in a conspiracy. Now Banda Bahadur continued the rebellion and was able to set up his rule in and around Patiala. By 1715, he got defeated as Khatri traders turned against him as trade was getting hurt due to law and order instability due to war. Some Hindu Jat zamindars like Churamat Jat switched sides and allied with Mughals. Jahandar Shah and Farrukhsiyar deployed divide and rule tactics. Jahandar Shah introduced the Ijaradari system in Punjab and this attracted Khatri traders as being an Ijradatra was financially lucrative. Jahandar Shah and Farrukhsiyar gave mansabs to Khatri traders who were now allied with the Mughals. By 1715, Banda Bahadur was defeated and executed in 1716. Rule of Misls. After 1715, the Sikh state did not come to an end as the Mughal Empire was weak. Now power got decentralized among Misls and a horizontal structure of polity confederation came into existence. Misls were kinship-based clans headed by Misls chief. In 1770, there were 60 Misls in Punjab with Dal Khalsa at the head with a chosen leader. Misls got united at the time of war, for example during the First Afghan, Second Afghan, and Third Afghan invasions. After defeating the Third Afghan invasion of Jaman Shah, there was the rise of Ranjit Singh of Sukerchakia Misl, who established dominance over other Misls and set himself as Maharaja of the Sikh state in 1801. In 1801, he conquered Lahore, and in 1809 conquered 5 Doabs and later conquered Multan and Kashmir by removing Afghans. Even EIC recognized him as a sovereign ruler of Punjab under the Treaty of Amritsar and a military alliance under the treaty. Features of the rule of Ranjit Singh. Trade got boosted and there was law and order stability. Financial power state as 60% of the land was royal land. Ranjit Singh maintained the balance of power in court between the Khalsa army commander and Khatri traders, Misls chiefs, and Dogras of Jammu. He had an inclusive attitude towards non-Khalsa Sikhs, therefore was culturally magnanimous. The autonomy of villages was respected. The topic of the next class, Jat Kingdom. Modern Indian History Class 07. Last class revision, 5 p.m. Jat Kingdom of Bharatpur, 509 p.m. Jats were anti-Mughal since the time of Jahangir and they set up the Jat Kingdom of Bharatpur under Churaman Jat, 1695 to 1721. This was done with help of revolts by peasants against the oppression due to the over-extraction of land revenue by the Mughals, especially in the context of the Jagirdari crisis of the 18th century. Maharaja Surajmal consolidated power and forced the Mughals to recognize him. He supported Marathas temporarily in the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761. He tried to implement military reforms by recruiting Europeans into the army, a Mughal-like revenue system, and removing family members from the courts. However, his death led to the decline of the Jat kingdom, which at one point extended from Delhi in the north to Agra in the west, Chambal in the south, and Ganda in the east. However, it was no utopia for peasants as land revenue demand was higher than during the time of the Mughals. Afghans Kingdom, 5:25 p.m. Afghan Kingdom in the north, Rohilkhand and Farrukhabad. Afghans were wandering warlords in North India. They migrated from Afghanistan to India due to political instability but were unorganized politically until the arrival of Sher Shah Suri in 1540. But again got disorganized after the Second Battle of Panipat in 1556, which ended the Suri dynasty's rule. The opportunity came with the weakening of Mughal post-Aurangzeb. Farrukhabad was set up as a kingdom in the east of Delhi by Bangash Pathans in 1713, making use of political instability in the Mughal polity. They named this kingdom after Farrukhsiyar as a gesture of accepting the symbolic authority of the Mughals. The next opportunity came during the invasion of Nadir Shah in 1738 to 1940, which weakened the Mughal Empire, also defeated by Marathas in 1738. Therefore, the kingdom of Rohilkhand was set up by Ali Muhammad Khan in 1737 to 1938 in the Himalayan foothills. In 1740, Ali Muhammad Khan was officially recognized as governor, therefore not legally independent. In 1774, Sujaudullah, Nawab of Awadh, annexed Rohilkhand with the help of EIC. The rest of Rohilkhand became a princely state. Farrukhabad was a weak kingdom and neighbors attacked it frequently. Both supported Abdali in the Third Battle of Panipat 1761 and Rohila controlled from 1761 to 1771 when they were defeated by Mahadji Scindia. After Abdali returned to Afghanistan, the Afghan kingdom's power decreased. Already autonomous state, 6 p.m. Rajputs. These were warrior groups who participated in the military labor market of North India. Around the 16th and 17th century, Rajputs emerged as a consolidated group of 20 major clans, therefore there existed a horizontal structure of polity. Local Rajput chief of each clan ruled their respective territory. During Akbar, the powerful Rajput chiefs were co-opted. Akbar recognized the authority of those Rajput chiefs who were extra powerful, therefore giving them legitimacy over and above small Rajput chiefs. With the military help of the Mughals, these Rajput chiefs consolidated power by defeating smaller Rajput chiefs. They maintained the military for the Mughal emperor as they were recognized as Mansabdars, also their lands were recognized as Watan Jagirs. They now played important role in Delhi politics. Therefore, unable to defeat the Rajputs, the Mughals co-opted them and increased the military strength of the Mughal empire. Also now the horizontal structure of polity was replaced by a more vertical structure in the Rajput polity. Tension in relationships during Aurangzeb. Not because of religion-based rivalry rather than expansion by Mewar under Raj Singh against other Rajput chiefs. Aurangzeb didn't want one supreme power in Rajputana and wanted to maintain the balance of power among Rajput chiefs. In 1680 to 1981, Mewar and Marwar revolted against Aurangzeb but failed. Reasons for revolt. Due to the death of an existing ruler, a child ruler came to power in Marwar that lay along the important trade route between Delhi, Agra, and Ahmedabad. Since Marwar was strategically important, Aurangzeb didn't want a child ruler and interfered in succession. This provided an opportunity for Mewar to ally with Marwar against Aurangzeb. The revolt failed as other Rajput chiefs didn't support it as they feared the loss of power to Mewar. In the 18th century, with the weakening of the Mughals, Rajput chiefs acted more independently, especially under Swai Jai Singh of Amber, who ruled Jaipur and was a powerful entity in Delhi politics. 1751 onwards, Rajputs were regularly attacked by Marathas, who extracted annual tributes and interfered in succession but could not conclusively defeat Rajputs. Mysore, 726 p.m. In the 16th century, Mysore was part of the Vijayanagara Empire, 1336 to 1646, and gradually became autonomous under the Vodaya dynasty. In 1673, Mysore became a military powerful and centralized Chikdevaja Vodaya. However, by 1761, Vodayas were reduced to puppets by corrupt PM Nanjaraj. Hyder Ali 1761 to 1982, was a man of humble origin who began as a junior officer in the army and later became a senior military general. In 1761, he overthrew PM Nazraj to establish his rule. Hyder Ali worked with the French to improve his military by importing technology and taking the help of French trainers. The army was designed on European models. The army was to be a summation of risalas, regiments. Each risala had a commander personally appointed by the king. Each risala had a clear chain of command and hierarchy leading up to the king. Each risala was a self-sufficient unit as it had its weaponry, transport, and own supplies. Therefore, a very efficient military organization capable of swift action was built. Hyder Ali consolidated power by subjugating local chiefs, Deshmukh, Polygars, big landlords with their private army who acted independently since the time Vijayanagara Empire, etc. Polygars and Deshmukh still now were effective rulers of the countryside as they controlled land revenue, and the wealth of the temples. The topic for the next class, Tipu Sultan and the land revenue model of Hyder Ali and Tipu. Modern Indian History Class 08. Mysore under Hyder Ali and Tipu, 507 p.m. Remove intermediaries, Deshmukhs, and introduce a direct collection of taxes by the state through state officials who got salaries and not commissions. This allowed more income for the state and low taxes for peasants as now no commission of intermediaries. This increased the financial strength of the state immensely. Did detailed field surveys to assess land revenue demand, therefore, preventing over-assessments. To maximize the land revenue system, Tipu modernized the irrigation system, introduced sericulture, and promoted crash crops. Land under Jagirdari was minimized. Tipu protected peasants from corruption and oppression of officials via effective supervision. Even Tipu's enemy accepted that his population was the most prosperous. In 1793, Tipu set up a state commercial cooperation to set up factories in and outside Mysore. The PSU set up 30 trading centers in and outside Mysore and even outside India. For example, in Muscat, Oman, and Mysore began international trade in lucrative goods like sandalwood, pepper, rice, silk, sulfur, cardamom, etc. Tipu's revenue model and his fiscal policies are also called military fiscalism, as a huge amount of wealth was generated by the state to build a strong military, and in this respect, Mysore behaved like EIC. Tipu sent ambassadors to France for importing foreign technology and to build an alliance against the British. Tipu introduced rockets in the military and was used in 1799, Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, which EIC copied and developed in 1806. However, dreams were bigger than resources, and constant warfare with Indian neighbors and EIC drained resources. This was because Mysore wanted to dominate the whole of South India and its trade, therefore developing rivals with Indian neighbors and EIC respectively. Tipu declared independence from the Mughals formally, for example, minted coins in his name and used his name in Khutbah Friday prayers. Tipu requested Farman decree from the Ottoman Empire's Khalifa, who was also a religious head of the Muslim world, declaring Tipu as a ruler independent from the Mughals. Travancore, 8:17 p.m. always maintained independence from the Mughals. Marthanda Varma The important ruler was Marthanda Varma, who by 1740 set up a strong centralized state by subjugating the local chiefs. He did some territorial expansion and built a West-like military with modern weapons, and in 1741 removed the Dutch from Cochin, who were there since 1669. He forced EIC to trade on his terms. He established a state monopoly over the pepper trade of Malabar and later all trade on the Malabar coast. Trade profits were utilized for military, agriculture, transport, and communication. Under Rama Varma, Travancore became the center of art and scholarship but declined militarily. In 1766 Hyder Ali attacked and annexed Malabar, and Calicut. Then Tipu attacked, and this contributed to the Third Anglo-Mysore War as EIC was an ally of Travancore. After Rama Varma, Travancore came under British influence. In 1800, a British resident was stationed in the court. In 1805 Travancore signed a subsidiary subordinate alliance with EIC that led to EIC control over foreign policy and military, in return for help in suppressing a revolt in the army by Nayar troops due to low salaries. In 1809, PM Devan Velu Thampi led a revolt by peasants and Nayar troops against EIC due to interference in the domestic affairs by British residents, which was crushed by EIC. The advent of Europeans, 703 PM. Colonialism was originally associated with settlement by foreigners, that is converting a newfound land into a colony. These foreign settlers established their domination and exploited indigenous people in the economic, political, and cultural domains. Colonialism implies the domination of economic, political, social, and cultural by foreigners of indigenous people. Foreigners may be in form of foreign settlers, businesses, and foreign states or foreign institutions. For example, post-decolonization, after WW2, neocolonialism began. Ex-colonies now had political independence legally, but they were still dominated and exploited by ex-colonial powers and international institutions like IMF and the World Banks. As these newly independent nations were economically weak and therefore dependent on foreign aid and loans, which were tied with conditionalities that prevented these nations from following independent policies, therefore this was colonialism in a new form, hence the name neocolonialism. Imperialism is when there is the use of the military or its threat. In imperialism, there is usually a loss of sovereignty and is usually done by a foreign state, therefore empire building via territorial annexations is a feature of imperialism usually. Colonialism and imperialism are used interchangeably. Old colonialism imperialism existed pre-industrialization of Western Europe, that is pre-1870. Pre-1817, it was motivated by gold, glory, and God. God represented the motive of spreading Christianity. Glory represented empire building. Gold represented economic motives and led to economic exploitation via loot of wealth and resources, plantation systems, trade of lucrative crops from the colony to the rest of the world, and the lucrative slave trade, where Africans were sold as slaves in the Americas for cheap labor in the plantation system. The topic of the next class, Advent of Europeans. Modern Indian History Class 09. Last class revision, 5:01 p.m. Advent of European, 5:15 p.m. Traditionally European trade with the East was done via the Silk Route, a land route to China, and a spice route, a sea route to the East. Traders from Venice and Geneva dominated European trade with the East and earned huge profits by selling to the rest of Europe. Urban sea part of the trade was dominated by Arab traders. In 1453 Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople and locked European trade with the East, triggering a search for a northwest trade route to the East. This led to the Age of Discovery in the 16th century, whereby man of the world was gradually developed and there were advances in shipping and knowledge of geography. In 1492, Columbus discovered Central America. In 1498, Vasco da Gama discovered a route via the Cape of Good Hope to India and reached Calicut. In 1500, Amerigo Vespucci discovered South America and proved that America was a continent different from India. In the early 16th century, the Portuguese discovered a new route to China and the Philippines. Therefore, European trade with the East was established. Portuguese in India, 5:50 p.m. Trade with India was done via a state-led corporation. They began their trade with South India and set up trading centers in different parts of India, especially coastal areas. They set up their main base in and around Surat and later in Goa. In 1510 they captured Goa from the Kingdom of Bijapur and Bombay in 1534. They dominated international trade in the East Indies for 100 years with HQ in Goa. Since India had strong land power, therefore Portuguese followed the policy of domination only of the high seas oceans and the oceanic trade of India. They did not aim to build a political empire in India. Portuguese dominated the high seas, dual water policy, as they were strong naval powers. They did armed trade, engaged in piracy, and therefore the passage via oceans and allowed passage only after payment of a license fee by other ships. They regularly raided Arab traders who until now dominated Arabian Sea trade and also threatened Mughal ships, forcing Mughals to give trade concessions from lower customs duties and permission to set up factories and trading centers. They were religious fanatics and engaged in forced conversions to Christianity. In the late 16th century, there was the rise of two new naval powers, Dutch and England. The first challenge to achieving freedom was navigation in the ocean and the second to removing Portuguese control over the oceanic trade of the East Indies. In 1588, in a decisive battle, Britain defeated Armada, a large Spanish naval fleet in the Atlantic Ocean, and now Britain and the Dutch could travel to the east via the Cape of Good Hope. British versus Portuguese, 6:39 p.m. In 1608, EIC wanted to open a factory in Surat, therefore sending Captain Hawkins to Jahangir's court. He was given a mansab and a jagir but then was removed from court due to pressure from the Portuguese. Therefore EIC realized that the military defeat of the Portuguese is a must for EIC to expand its trade with India. In 1612, EIC defeated the Portuguese navy in Surat and therefore was rewarded by Jahangir with a royal famine in 1612, which gave EIC the right to establish itself on the west coast. Hence Surat factory was set up in 1612. To extract more concession, British government sent Thomas Roe as an ambassador and he was accepted as a resident in Jahangir's court. Finally, in 1617, he was able to extract another royal famine where the British got the right to establish factories in the whole of the Mughal Empire and liberal trading rights. These angered the Portuguese and in 1620 conflicts culminated in a major battle where the British won and this ended Portuguese domination of international trade in India. In 1661, King Charles II of England got the island of Bombay in dowry from the Portuguese. Therefore, by the mid-17th century, the Portuguese were restricted to Goa, Daman and Diu, Dadra, and Nagar Haveli. British versus Dutch, 7:09 p.m. Dutch removed the Portuguese from Ceylon and the East Indies, Indonesia. And now rivalry between the British and the Dutch who fought for decades, and finally by the mid-17th century British was defeated and a compromise was reached whereby the Dutch agreed to not attack the British in India and the British left Indonesia to the Dutch. British stayed in Malaya and Dutch dominated Cochin by 1669. The Dutch were removed from Cochin in 1741 by Marthanda Varma. By 1795, the complete removal of the Dutch from India by British. English East India Company, 7:28 p.m. It was set up on 31st December 1600 by a royal charter which was its founding document issued by Queen Elizabeth. The tools given by royal charter to EIC were monopoly over British trade with the East Indies, that is with all land east of Cape of Good Hope for 15 years. EIC was allowed to carry gold out of Britain to buy eastern goods. The right to wage war, acquire territories, and administer them. The goal for EIC formation as per the charter was not empire building but trade with the East to counter Dutch competition. Presidencies of EIC. Presidencies of EIC in Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta served as regional HQ of EIC trade with South, West, and East India respectively. The term presidency was given or the status of HQ was given when these places came to have significant EIC establishments in form of warehouse, offices, homes, etc. Later when EIC annexed territories in India, they were added to respectively regional presidencies leading to the expansion of the company's regional HQ into provinces of British India. The Madras Presidency was set up in 1652. The Bombay Presidency was set up in 1681. The Calcutta Presidency was set up in 1699. The governor of the presidency was a regional manager of EIC, who initially looked mainly after the business of EIC, but once EIC became conqueror and ruler, then ruling parts of India became his additional responsibility as the company transformed itself into a company state. The topic of the next, Rise of EIC as Political Power. Modern Indian History Class 10. Rise of English East India Company as political power, 5:05 p.m. Was the conquest of India a result of British policy? British arguments. Britain has no such policy, and the conquest of India was the product of sub-imperialism, which are the result of policies and actions and personal ambitions of senior officials of EIC like Robert Clive, Governor of Calcutta Presidency, Richard Wellesley, Governor-General of Bengal from 1798 to 1805, Hastings, Governor-General of Bengal, 1813-23, Dalhousie, Governor-General of India, 1848 to 1956. They had personal ambitions for British polity and a personal desire for empire building. Many senior EIC officials build good political careers after they retire from EIC. For example, Wellesley became Secretary of State, a cabinet member. In the Pitt's India Act of 1784, there was a parliamentary prohibition on conquest in India. The goal behind the Royal Charter of 1600 was trade and not empire building. Indian arguments. Yes, there was sub-imperialism in India. However, the British state cannot escape responsibility for imperialism in India as a tool of conquest to EIC by the state as a charter of EIC that was a founding document issued by the state, initially by the Crown and later by Parliament. It gave power to EIC to wage war, sign treaties, acquire territory, and administer them. EIC had the military support of the Royal Military in its military conflicts, and without the Royal Military EIC could not have begun the conquest of India. Battle of Plassey 1757. Even the 1857 revolt was crushed with the help of the Royal Military. The state assisted EIC in setting up and developing EIC presidencies. For example, Bombay was given an annual rent of just £10 to EIC by the Crown. Therefore, state helped EIC set up a strong base in India, leading to higher profits via trade that led to the capability of EIC to have its big army. British Crown, state, and important figures in British polity benefited monetarily from EIC trade and conquest. For example, £17,000 were given by EIC to the Crown monarchy in the 17th century in return for the renewal of charters. In 1698, Parliament auctioned the monopoly of British trade with East the new company as it offered a £2 million loan versus £700,000 offered by EIC. In 1709, EIC and new company merged. In 1767, EIC was mandated by Parliament state to pay £400,000 annum to the state. Therefore, state wanted its share of EIC loot of Bengal after the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the Battle of Buxar in 1764. Important figures were shareholders of EIC, for example, many parliamentarians and Queen Elizabeth herself. EIC became an important tool of the foreign policy of Britain as EIC dominated international trade in Britain. After the Regulation Act of 1773 and the Pitt's India Act of 1784, EIC affairs in India came under the supervision and control of the British state, and the Board of Control could pass binding orders to EIC. Now the principal servants of EIC in India could only be appointed after the approval of the Crown. Therefore, even if imperialism was not possible for the British state, an opportunity made use of and even created by important EIC officials in India, that is sub-imperialism. The British state cannot escape responsibility for imperialism in India. Events in empire building by EIC, 7:11 p.m. EIC vs Aurangzeb, 1686. EIC attacked the Mughals in Bengal as Aurangzeb's constant warfare hurt the overland trade, therefore hurting EIC's oceanic trade. EIC was crushed but then forgiven in return for 1.5 lakh rupees compensation as Mughals got revenue from EIC in form of customs duties and from Indian merchants who sold goods to EIC in form of domestic taxes. Indian merchants got business from EIC. The inflow of gold due to EIC exports from India. Indian peasants and artisans benefited as EIC trade generated demands for their goods. In fact, in 1691, Aurangzeb issued a royal farman that gave EIC the right to duty-free trade in return for just 3,000 rupees annum. Role of Britain-France rivalry. Role of Britain-France rivalry. Three Carnatic Wars, 1746 to 1948, 1749 to 1954, and 1756 to 1963. Battle of Plassey. Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, 1799. First Carnatic War, 1746 to 1948, 7:50 p.m. It was part of and the result of the Austrian War of Succession in 1740 to 1948. where Britain and France with their allies fought in Europe, the Americas, and India. Dupleix was governor of the French EIC in Pondicherry, the main base of French in India since 1664. He has personal ambitions of empire building and wanted the French EIC to dominate the international trade of South India. The conflict began in 1746 after capturing Fort St. George in Madras. Dupleix refused to hand it over as promised to Nawab of Carnatic. This led to the First Carnatic 1746 to 178 with Carnatic and British EIC versus French EIC. War was won by Dupleix, however. In North America British were victorious, and for France, its American possession was more important. Therefore, under the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle 1748, France got back its possession in North America while the British got back Madras. Therefore, status quo was maintained. Now Dupleix searched for the next opportunity to increase French influence, and this led to the Second Carnatic War. The topic for the next class, Second Carnatic Wars. Modern Indian History Class 11. Last class revision, 5:02 p.m. First Carnatic War. It was part of and the result of the Austrian War of Succession. War was won by Dupleix, however. In North America British were victorious, and for France, its American possession was more important. Therefore, under the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle 1748, France regained its possession in North America while the British returned Madras. Second Carnatic War, 1749 to 1954, 5:15 p.m. Dupleix got an opportunity in the form of succession disputes in Hyderabad and Carnatic. In Hyderabad Nasir Jung versus Muzaffar Jung and Carnatic Muhammad Ali versus Chanda Sahib. Dupleix supported Chanda Sahib and Muzaffar Jung as he wanted economic and political benefits after putting his choice of candidate in power. Therefore, anxious British EIC supported Muhammad Ali and Nasir Jung. Dupleix and Plassey won the first phase by 1751. While Robert Clive of British EIC won the second phase by 1754. After first phase, Muzaffar Jung was declared Nizam of Hyderabad and Chanda Sahib of Arcot, Carnatic. Muzaffar Jung was killed on his way from Carnatic to Hyderabad by Nawab of Kurnool as he had supported Muzaffar Jung but now feared a breach of the promise of territory made by Muzaffar Jung. Now Plassey continued to march to Hyderabad and inflicted colossal terror. He put Allahabad Jung in power in Hyderabad and placed a French military for the protection of Nizam. This military was to be paid for by Hyderabad. Therefore, French EIC got northern circles from Hyderabad. Other French gains after first phase. Plassey was stationed as a French agent in the Hyderabad court, establishing French political influence in Hyderabad, personal jagirs for Plassey, and £200,000 for French EIC. In Carnatic, huge Peroncil jagirs for Dupleix. Dupleix was declared as Nawab of all lands between River Krishna and Cape Comorin, with Chanda Sahib as Nawab of Arcot. After second phase victory by British, Dupleix was recalled by France in 1754 due to high war expenditure. Also, France wanted to honor the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle 1748 to secure its assets in America. Chanda Sahib surrendered but was still beheaded despite the promise of life by Robert Clive. France was allowed to retain territory around Pondicherry, its factors in Carnatic, northern circles, and French agent at Hyderabad court. Muhammad Ali became the Nawab of Carnatic. Therefore, French influence in Hyderabad and British influence in Carnatic was the net result of the Second Carnatic War. Third Carnatic War, 1756 to 1963, 6:22 p.m. Resultant part of a 7-year global war, 1756 to 1963, fought between Britain, France, and their respective allies. It was fought in Europe, Africa, the Americas, and India. Count de Lally arrived from France to lead the French military along with Plassey, who was in charge of northern circles, while Robert Clive played an essential role from the British side. The Royal Military of Britain and France arrived in India. Why did France lose? Tactical mistake. Plassey left northern circles unguarded to help Lally in Carnatic, leading to the loss of northern circles to the British. Poor leadership of Lally. He was hated among French officials and sepoys due to his rude conduct, which hurt the army's morale. The superior British Navy. The superior financial strength of Britain and British EIC while France faced financial difficulty. For example, French soldiers were unpaid for months, which hurt morale. Britain had witnessed growth earlier than France during the Industrial Revolution in Britain, with more significant trade profit as trading with more regions and longer time, whereas feudalism ended in France very late. The result of the war was the question of dominance over international trade in India was decided in the British favour. Most decided was the Battle of Vandivash, and the French lost all over, including Pondicherry. French lost all gains made since 1749 under Dupleix. Therefore, French were restricted to their bases. They were barred from fortifying their bases and from keeping a strong military. In 1769, French EIC was ended by France. French continued in Chandigarh and Pondicherry. The high number of British Royal Military troops arrived in India in favour of EIC, giving EIC the military advantage over Indian states. For example, they felt confident enough to start the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Long-term effects of Carnatic Wars. Post-1757, EIC began maintaining a large army with the help of the loot of Bengal. Now EIC began increasing its political influence and started empire building in 1757. In 1766, Hyderabad gave northern circles to EIC in return for military protection against Mysore and Marathas. In 1798, Hyderabad became the first state to sign a subsidiary alliance that brought military and foreign policy under EIC. The huge territory of Mysore was annexed by 1799 via the Third and Fourth Anglo-Mysore War and subsidiary alliance signed by Mysore in 1799. After the death of an ally, Muhammad Ali Carnatic was annexed in 1801. In 1805, subsidiary alliance was signed with Travancore. Peshwa signed a subsidiary alliance in 1803 to regain Peshwaship with British help. In the Second Anglo-Maratha War, Marathas lost significant territory, and Scindia of Gwalior signed a subsidiary alliance. Therefore, EIC began political influence in South India with the Carnatic War and dominated South India politically by the early 19th century. Bengal and EIC Battle of Plassey, 1757, 7:45 p.m. The origin of the conflict was Farrukhsiyar's royal famine of 1717. It gave EIC the right to duty-free trade in Bengal, Gujarat, and Deccan and the right to use the royal mint. It gave renting of 38 villages around Calcutta. Murshid Quli Khan allowed duty-free trade to EIC but did not allow misuse of dastaks for private trade by EIC officials. He also did not allow the use of the royal mint and allowed renting of villages but not their purchase by EIC. Therefore, royal famine became the origin of the conflict. However, misuse of dastaks began and continued. Dastaks was a document issued by EIC officials that certified a set of goods are EIC goods and therefore entitled to duty-free trade. Therefore, dastaks operationalized the duty-free trade privilege given by the royal famine, and misuse of dastaks implied duty evasion by EIC officials as they wrongly claimed their private trade as EIC trade. The topic of the next class, short-term reasons for the Battle of Plassey. Modern Indian History Class 12. Battle of Plassey, 5:01 p.m. Short-term reasons. Misuse of dastaks and illegal trade. By the 1750s, £100,000 was the quantum of private trade by EIC officials, which was 50 times their annual salaries. EIC officials also sold dastaks to non-EIC merchants. Nawab of Bengal lost a huge amount of revenue due to the misuse of dastaks, that is tax duty evasion. Private trade of EIC officials hurt the economic interest of EIC as well, but EIC was unable to control it. Illegal trade. The Chhatia of EIC gave a monopoly to EIC over British trade with all territories to the east of Cape of Good Hope, and therefore trade with India by anyone other than EIC was illegal. For example, private trade of EIC officials and trade by non-EIC merchants from Britain. Interlopers were non-EIC British merchants who traded illegally in India. Free merchant trade was also illegal but artificially legalized as EIC allowed them to settle in EIC establishments if they agreed to act as middlemen between Indian merchants and EIC instead of directly trading with India, that is, they sold Indian goods to EIC in India instead of exporting themselves. Britain-France rivalry. EIC feared the French and was afraid of the French repeating their success in Carnatic. Therefore, EIC began adding fortifications in Calcutta in 1755 without the permission of Alivardi Khan. EIC officials also offered protection to fugitives from the Nawab's court. Therefore, EIC challenged the sovereign authority of the Nawab. However, Alivardi Khan avoided conflict and followed diplomacy. Role of Sirajud-Dowla. He acted in haste and stopped all misuse of dastaks, therefore hurting the private trade of EIC officials. When the British gave asylum to Krisha Ballabh, charged with fraud with Siraj, and EIC began a new fortification in Calcutta, Siraj acted. He took over a British factory in Qasim Bazar near Hooghly and attacked and captured Calcutta and renamed it Ali Nagar. Also during this attack, Black Hole tragedy in Calcutta, thereby 30 British men were killed due to suffocation because of overcrowding in a non-ventilated room. This created huge controversy among the British. Events. Robert Clive arrived with the army from Madras and then defeated Siraj, took back Calcutta, and signed the Treaty of Ali Nagar with Siraj, which restored all privileges of EIC. Then the British defeated the French in Chandanagar and destroyed the Hooghly port, important for the French. Now Jagat Seth and Mir Jafar bribed EIC and Robert Clive, so they replaced Siraj with Mir Jafar as Nawab. Mir Jafar was the war commander of the Bengal army. There was rivalry in the court between merchants, bankers, zmindar, and nobles. Siraj was hated due to his disrespectful conduct, and Indian merchants and bankers benefited greatly from their business with EIC. Mir Jafar ensured that the majority of the Bengal army did not fight in the Battle of Plassey in 1757 when EIC attacked. Therefore Siraj was defeated easily by Robert Clive. Siraj ran away, later captured and killed. Result: significance of Battle of Plassey, 6:18 p.m. Now Mir Jafar was a puppet Nawab of EIC. EIC's military domination of Bengal began, therefore beginning the political supremacy of EIC in India. Plassey plunder, 1757 to 1965. £275,000 to the Royal Military for distribution to their members. 2.25 crore rupees to EIC. Personal Jagir for Clive is worth £35,000 per annum and £234,000 in cash to him. From 1757 to 1965, £2.5 million were taken by EIC as political gifts from the Nawab of Bengal. Change in the structure of EIC trade. Now gold was no more needed by Britain to buy Indian goods, as Indian money was now used to buy Indian goods. Indian gold was used to buy Chinese goods, and Indian gold was taken to Britain. Therefore, from gold outflow pre-1757, now there was gold and wealth inflow to Britain. Therefore, drain of wealth from India began after 1757. This also led to a huge dip in Bengal revenue. Now rampant misuse of dastaks, and EIC officials made personal fortunes. Example: Clive, governor of Calcutta Presidency. When Mir Jafar could not pay any more to EIC, he was replaced with his son-in-law Mir Qasim by the EIC. Battle of Buxar, 1764, 7:02 p.m. Background. Mir Qasim was an efficient administrator and wanted independence from EIC control, therefore shifted his base from Murshidabad to Bihar to be physically away from the British. He gathered money and started building his army. To get the support of Indian merchants, he abolished all taxes on domestic trade, therefore bringing parity between Indian merchants and British traders, who did not pay any taxes when they did domestic trade, through their Indian agents called Gomatsas. This hurt revenue of Bengal, but Qasim wanted the support of Indian merchants. EIC did not like this streak of independence in Qasim, and thus defeated and replaced Qasim with Mir Jafar. Now Qasim escaped with wealth to Awadh and built an alliance with Sujauddaulah, Nawab of Awadh, and Shah Alam II, Mughal emperor, who was in Awadh. Fugitive Prince Shah Alam II escaped Delhi due to fear of life from Imamul Mulk, Wazir, and grandson of Nizamul Mulk. He was also frustrated with Delhi court politics and wanted to build his kingdom in the east, that is Bengal, which had stopped sending revenue to Delhi since Alivardi Khan. Sujauddaulah agreed to a promise of 30 million rupees, Bihar and its treasury for Awadh, lack of modern nationalism. Reason for defeat. A tactical mistake by Shujah, who followed an offensive strategy rather than a more appropriate defensive strategy of cutting off the supply lines of the EIC army in Buxar, and he also ignored the advice of Qasim. Therefore Hector Munro emerged victorious, and now EIC sent Clive from London to India to negotiate the Treaty of Allahabad. The Treaty of Allahabad, 1765. EIC treated Shah Alam II with respect, as in he lay sovereignty of India, and with him on their side, EIC could have greater influence in India. The Treaty of Allahabad was signed between Robert Clive of EIC and Shah Alam II and Sujauddaulah. EIC promised a tribute of 26 lakh rupees annum to the emperor, although never gave this help. EIC promised Shah Alam to military help to recapture Delhi, which was under Rohilla Afghans since 1761, although never helped recapture Delhi. The topic of the next class, the Treaty of Allahabad W.R.T. Bengal. Modern Indian History Class 13. Treaty of Allahabad, 5:05 p.m. Treaty of Allahabad and Bengal. EIC got Diwani from Orissa, Bengal, and Bihar. That is Revenue Administration and Revenues of Bengal Suba. Therefore, for first time, EIC took over a sovereign function. Therefore, EIC got an additional source of income in form of revenues from the richest province of India. The dual government, 1765 to 1972, of Bengal. Legally Diwani, revenue administration, was given to EIC and Nizamat, non-revenue administration, with the Nawab of Bengal. The policy of indirect rule was initiated in Bengal as Nawab of Bengal became a puppet of EIC as a British resident now stationed in court. The British resident in 1772 became the actual centre of power. EIC also got the right to appoint Deputy Subdar, who headed Nizamat on behalf of Nawab. Therefore, through him EIC indirectly controlled Nizamat. Therefore, in practice, EIC got full control of Bengal, that is Diwani as well as Nizamat. Legally dual government from 1765 to 1972, practically EIC can rule legally in Diwani and indirectly in Nizamat but did not as EIC appointed Deputy Subdar Muhammad Reza Khan, who headed or ruled Nizamat on behalf of the Nawab, also as Diwan of EIC. Therefore, Indian administration under the Indian Deputy Subdar continued till 1772. The dual government was ended due to worsening law and order, and Warren Hastings wanted to improve administration. Therefore, EIC established direct rule of its own in both Diwani and Nizamat in 1772. Treaty of Allahabad and Awadh. Shuja was made to pay 5 million rupees. Shuja was now a puppet, and a British resident could now be stationed in Awadh court. The policy of a ring fence was initiated by Clive, but was associated mainly with Warren Hastings. The policy of a ring fence meant creating a buffer around the core interest regions of EIC by signing a military alliance with neighbours. A military alliance was signed between Awadh and EIC. Therefore, now EIC could use Awadh military resources for the protection of EIC's interests in Bengal. Awadh came under the military control of EIC as an EIC army stationed in Awadh permanently, as it was to be paid for by Awadh in form of an annual subsidy. Duty-free trade in Awadh. Therefore, Treaty of Allahabad with Awadh was a mini-subsidiary alliance. Subsidiary alliance Subordinate alliance, 6:44 p.m. It was a policy initiated by Wellesley. There was a ban on imperial expansion by the Pitt's India Act because of huge war expenditure by EIC. Therefore, British wanted to consolidate gains made from these wars and prevent war expenditure. Therefore, now EIC was to follow the policy of indirect rule and maintain the balance of power among Indian states. Wellesley was an empire builder and had huge personal political ambitions in British polity. He gave the policy of indirect rule and balance of power and reinitiated the policy of expansion. He convinced the British government by overplaying the fear of Napoleon attacking India after aligning with Indian states like Mysore. Napoleon attacked Egypt in 1798 to control Middle East and hurt British trade by dominating the Arabian Sea. He also had ambitions of re-establishing French influence over India and was in communications with Tipu. However, there was no real threat of the French invading India, and the British knew it. Still, the government agreed to Wellesley as the primary goal of British foreign policy was to protect India from European rivals. Wellesley found a middle path in form of a subsidiary alliance that led to supremacy over Indian states without annexation. The Model Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance. British protection to the Indian state against its neighbours and also against the internal threat of law and order instability. For this, EIC stationed its military permanently in the Indian state. State to pay for maintenance of EIC army stationed in form of annual subsidy. A British resident stationed in the court of an Indian ruler. British consent was needed for stationing any Europeans in court. Indian states must consult Governor-General while negotiating with Indian rulers or foreign power. The promise of non-interface by EIC in the internal affairs of the Indian states. Impact of subsidiary alliance on Indian states. There was a drain of wealth in the form of subsidy to EIC and the subsidy was high. EIC gradually increased the amount of subsidy demanded. Now EIC could maintain a large army at expense of Indian states as money for this large army came in form of a subsidy. At times Indian rulers gave the territory to EIC as payment of subsidy. For example, in 1801 half of Awadh was given. There was a loss of jobs for military men as the army of the Indian state was disbanded. Indian ruler has to raise taxes to pay subsidies, and that made him unpopular. Peasants came under the oppression of high land revenue, and this increased the chances of peasant revolts. Indian rulers were accused of maladministration while they had no powers, as the British did not respect the promise of non-interference in internal affairs, and British resident established their indirect rule. Indian states lost powers to settle border disputes with each other, therefore now could not unite as lost control of foreign policy. They also lost the ability to self-defense as they had to disband their armies. Hyderabad was the first to sign a subsidiary alliance in 1798 due to fear of Marathas and Mysore. The significant territory of Mysore after the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War in 1799, and Mysore signed a subsidiary alliance in 1799. In 1801, Carnatic was annexed after the death of EIC ally Muhammad Ali in 1795. In 1801, Awadh signed a subsidiary alliance, and half of Awadh was annexed as permanent payment of subsidy. In 1802, Gaikwad of Baroda signed a subsidiary alliance in return for EIC's help in a succession dispute. In 1803, Peshwa Bazi Rao signed a subsidiary alliance in return for EIC's help to regain Peshwaship after he was removed by Holkar of Indore. After the defeat in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, Scindia of Gwalior signed a subsidiary alliance, and significant territory of Maratha Sardars annexed by EIC. In 1805, Travancore signed a subsidiary alliance in return for military help to suppress a revolt by Nair troops due to low salary. Wellesley was recalled in 1805 due to high war expenditure. The topic of the next class, the Anglo-Mysore War. Modern Indian History Class 14. Anglo-Mysore War, 508 p.m. Reasons for animosity between Mysore versus EIC, Hyderabad, Marathas, and Travancore. Mysore wanted to dominate the whole of South India politically, therefore rivalry with Indian neighbours. Mysore wanted to dominate the trade of South India, and this was against the interest of EIC. Therefore, rise of Mysore as a political, military, and mercantilist, fulfillment of profit motive via trade, power threatened the British. Mysore followed a policy of military fiscalism, which was similar to the policy followed by EIC. Mysore used resources from land revenue and trade to modernize its military with help of the French. Therefore, it competed with EIC in core interesting areas of EIC, thus a threat to EIC. In four Anglo-Mysore wars usually, Hyderabad and Marathas fought on the side of EIC except in 1780 to 1982 when there was an alliance between Marathas, Hyderabad, and Mysore against EIC. Nana Fadnavis was first to realize the political ambitions of EIC in India. Therefore took initiative to create the above alliance. First Anglo-Maratha and so was the Second Anglo-Mysore War in 1780 to 1784, while Hyderabad was turning against EIC as EIC took over Guntur. However, EIC soon settled disputes by returning Guntur to Hyderabad and signing the Treaty of Salbai in 1780 to that ended the war with Marathas and creating a military alliance between EIC and Marathas. Therefore breaking an alliance of Indian powers and replacing it with a triple alliance of EIC, Hyderabad, and Marathas by 1782. Also, the aggressive foreign policy of Tipu contributed to the isolation of Mysore. Results of four Anglo-Mysore Wars. In first two Anglo-Mysore Wars, 1766 to 1969 and 1780 to 1984, status quo was maintained territorially. However, Mysore lost roughly half of the territory to EIC, Marathas, and Hyderabad in the Third Anglo-Mysore War in 1789-92, Malabar, Barmahal, Dindugul. Further major loss of territory in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, where Tipu died defending his capital, Seringapatam, and the Vodaya dynasty was restored to power and the subsidiary alliance was signed with More in 1799. EIC focused on taking over coastal areas like Malabar, Canara, and surrounding Mysore. Travancore, 5:52 p.m. In 1800 a British resident was stationed in Travancore, therefore EIC influence began after the strict rule of Matanda Varma and Rama Varma ended. In 1805 there was a revolt by Nair troops due to grievances related to salaries, and Travancore signed a subsidiary alliance in return for military help by EIC. However, the promise of non-interface in internal affairs wasn't kept by the British resident. Therefore 1809, Diwan Velu Thapi revolted with help of peasants and Nair troops, and this revolt was crushed. Carnatic, 6:06 p.m. In 1801 Carnatic was annexed by Wellesley after the death of ally Muhammad Ali. Anglo-Maratha War, 6:07 p.m. First Anglo-Maratha War in 1775 to 1982. Second Anglo-Maratha War in 1803 to 2005. Third Anglo-Maratha War in 1817 to 2019. Importance of Deccan for British. Large coastal areas, that is West Coast with Marathas, Konkan Coast and some Malabar Coast. High cotton trade with China from Gujarat. First Anglo-Maratha War in 1775 to 1982. Reasons. Raghunath Rao was removed as Peshwa in the Barbhai conspiracy by Nana Fadnavis. As Raghunath Rao had become Feva after the killing of Narayan Rao. Now Raghunath Rao went to EIC in Bombay and the signed Treaty of Surat that led to the First Anglo-Maratha War. Treaty of Surat, 1775. The governor of Bombay Presidency of EIC agreed to help Raghunath Rao to regain Peshwarship, and in return, Raghunath Rao promised Salsette and Bassein near Bombay. Events. After Regulating Act of 1773 by the British Parliament, governors of Bombay and Madras were subordinated to the Governor-General of Bengal in matters of war and peace except in emergency circumstances when they could act independently. Therefore, Governor of Bombay acted independently by signing the Treaty of Surat. To prevent war expenditure, Governor-General of Bengal overturned the Treaty of Surat and negotiated a Treaty of Purandar. EIC recognized Madhav Rao too as Peshwa and EIC got Salsette and Bassein. Marathas did not allow the French any position in their domain, however, Nana Fadnavis gave the French a port. Therefore treaty could not be finalized and war resumed. By 1782 British were defeated. A contributory factor was the alliance between Indian powers. However, it was an inconclusive victory, therefore Marathas signed a Treaty of Salbai, whereby war was ended, and the Marathas got back their territory with EIC. British recognized Madhav Rao too as Peshwa. British retained Salsette, and France did not allow any position. Raghunath Rao was pensioned off. Second Anglo-Maratha War, 1803 to 2005, 6:48 p.m. Background. Due to high war expenditure, the Pitt's India Act of 1784 banned imperial expansion. But this policy changed with Wellesley. In 1802 Wellesley signed a subsidiary alliance with Gaikwad of Baroda in return for help in a succession dispute. Reasons for war. Wellesley was an empire builder. Fractionalism rose in Marathas polity after the suicide of Peshwa Madhva Rao due to over-controlling Nana Fadnavis and increased opposition to Nana. Bazi Rao too, son of Raghunath Rao, wanted to remove the influence of Nana Fadnavis. In 1800, Nana Fadnavis, who could have kept Maratha Sardar, died, therefore factionalism increased further. In 1802, Hokar of Indore defeated Scindia and also Bazi Rao too. Now Bazi Rao too went to EIC to regain Peshwarship and signed the Treaty of Bassein 1803, whereby he signed a subsidiary alliance with EIC, and now the Second Anglo-Maratha War began. Result. EIC was victorious in the war. Subsidiary alliance signed with Scindia. Scindia lost all territory north of Yamuna including Delhi and Agra and all his part in Gujarat. Bhonsle of Nagpur lost Odisha to EIC. Tributaries of Marathas, those who pay annual tributes, like Jats, Bundelas, Rajputs, and Rohillas, signed a subsidiary alliance with EIC. Due to high war expenditure, Wellesley was recalled and Cornwallis again made the Governor-General of Bengal with clear instructions to follow the policy of non-interference and no expansion. The policy of paramountcy, 1813, 7:18 p.m. It meant that henceforth a new policy of paramountcy was initiated by Hastings. The British were to be the significant supreme power among all other forces in India. Therefore British interests were to be paramount, and to protect these paramount interests British to have the right to interfere in the internal affairs of Indian states and even the right to annex Indian states. Therefore, from 1813, Indian states were to have no rights if British interests demanded so. Indian states had rights over internal affairs in a subsidiary alliance. Therefore, paramountcy was a subsidiary alliance less any rights for the Indian state. Third Anglo-Maratha War, 1817 to 2019, 7:50 p.m. Reasons for the war. The policy of paramountcy again gave a push to imperial expansion. Since 1803, the subsidiary alliance, Peshwa Baji Rao II was a puppet of the EIC and he now wanted to regain independence from EIC control. Also, the policy of non-interference since 1805 allowed Maratha Sardars to consolidate power and feel confident militarily. Therefore, Baji Rao II allied with Marathas to overthrow British dominance and the Third Anglo-Maratha War began. Results of the war. EIC was victorious in this war. Peshwaship was abolished, therefore Peshwa Baji Rao II was the last Peshwa. Maharashtra, which is Swarajya, was annexed by the British. A subsidiary alliance was signed with Holkar and Bhonsle and lost significant territory to EIC. Therefore, by 1819, EIC has total control over all territory south of Vindhyas. Annexation for Awadh, 7:57 p.m. Dalhousie. He implemented and used the policy of paramountcy to expand the British Empire in India. He annexed territories in the following ways. Annexing territory instead of payment of subsidy, for example, Barar from Hyderabad in 1853. By fighting wars, for example, Second Anglo-Sikh War that led to the annexation of Punjab. Via doctrine of lapse, which was the product of the policy of paramountcy. Under this, though state was annexed where there was no legal heir, that is, no biological heir of the ruler. The annexation was justified as an unclear line of succession could lead to political instability due to succession disputes, therefore, putting British interests under threat. Examples of such annexation under the doctrine of lapse. Sambalpur 1849. Bhagat 1850. Satara 1848. Udaipur 1852. Nagpur 1853. Jhansi 1854. To protect the British paramount interest from maladministration in Awadh, he annexed Awadh in 1856. To safeguard British paramount interest from the threat of neighbour powers, he fought and won the Second Burma War and annexed Pegu in Lower Burma. Second Anglo-Sikh War to prevent any possibility of Russian influence in India via Afghanistan. The topic of the next class, annexation of Awadh. Modern Indian History Class 15. A brief overview of the previous class, 5:01 p.m. Annexation of Awadh, 5:07 p.m. Tui was a form of the subsidiary alliance, SA, but a concrete shape was given by Wellesley 9805 when the formal SA Treaty was signed in 1801. Awadh was important as 3/5 of indigo cultivation was in Awadh plus importance of the export of Awadh raw cotton to China. Subsidy demanded under the Treaty of Allahabad 1765 was gradually increased by EIC to compensate for high war expenditure. The arrival of Wellesley 9805 he interfered in the succession of Awadh. After the death of Asaf Ud-Daula 7597, EIC refused to accept his son Wazir Ali 9798 as Nawab and made uncle Saadat Ali Khan to Nawab in 1798 in return for some territory and 76 lakh rupees as an annual subsidy. Conflict arose with Saadat Ali Khan due to interference by the British resident plus misuse of the Dastak since 1765 plus Nawab defaulted on payment of subsidy in 1801. Therefore, now Richard Wellesley 9805 sent his brother Henry to impose SA on Awadh in 1801 plus half of Awadh was annexed as permanent payment of subsidy. LR from this territory is equal to 1.3 crore vs justified decided 76 lakh. Therefore, EIC annexed Gorakhpur Rohilkhand Doa. Despite permanent payment of subsidy, EIC continues to demand more money, therefore, Nawab was forced to increase taxes and became unpopular among zamindars and peasants plus now the oppression of peasants due to high LR, therefore, fear of peasant revolts by 1855 plus by 1855 British resident became the real centre of power. For example held his informal court, therefore, degrading the status of Nawab. Now, Dalhousie 4856 accused Nawab of maladministration, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, while in reality, high subsidy demand was responsible for the situation but Nawab had no powers and all responsibilities as a British resident established indirect rule. In 1856, Dalhousie annexed the rest of Awadh on grounds of maladministration to protect British paramount interests of trade and business in Awadh. Anglo-Sikh Wars, 5:31 p.m. Background. As per the policy of the ring fence, the British also wanted stable frontiers to ensure the protection of the British Empire from foreign invasions. If a neighbouring power threatened the frontiers, or the frontier state became weak, then the British acted and annexed the frontier state or tried to establish indirect rule in the border Indian state or the immediate neighbourhood of India. Example in Afghanistan. Make a flowchart from the board. Reasons for First Anglo-Sikh War 1845. After the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh 0139, factionalism increased in Punjab polity with rivalries between Sindh and Valias, Misl chief, Dogras from Jammu, poor wazirs, the Khalsa army and princes from the royal family. Also, there were succession disputes and political murders, plus there was the rise of the Khalsa army as a political power. In the Sikh polity, it talked about the idea of the rule of panchayats which threatened the British. Therefore, political instability in frontier states plus rise of Khalsa army as a political player led to action by British in form of First Anglo-Sikh War where British plus Dogras vs Sikh state. GGI is equal to Hardinge 1844 to 1948. Results. This led to the humiliating Treaty of Lahore 1846 where A. The size of the Khalsa army was decreased and an EIC army was stationed. B. EIC annexed Jalandhar Doab. C. Kashmir was given to Raja Gulab Singh Dogra of Jammu, *J and K. D. Maharaja Dalip Singh 4349 is now to be advised by a British resident, that is, the policy of indirect rule was initiated. There was another treaty in December 1846, whereby the mother of Dalip Singh was removed as regent, and a regency council headed by a British resident was set up. Therefore, the British control of military and internal administration. Second Anglo-Sikh War, 1848 to 1949, by Dalhousie 4856. Reasons is equal to Sikh chiefs governors revolted against the British plus Dalhousie 4856, an empire builder. Result is equal to full annexation of Punjab. Expansionism of British, 6:18 p.m. Draw a diagram from the board on the core area and a new threat. With empire building, the core kept on expanding, leading to new fears about protecting the core and leading to further empire building. Therefore, the 19th century saw a series of annexations and wars by the British. Proof is equal to First Burma War, 1824 to 1928. Reason Bengal frontier was under threat due to expansionist Burma in the 18th and 19th centuries. Burma had made Manipur, Kutch, and then Assam its sphere of influence in the 19th century plus after 6 years of no war after the Third Anglo-Maratha War, 1817 to 2019, the EIC army wanted something, therefore argued that expansion by Burma inspiring Indian rulers against EIC and this led to First Burma War 1824 to 1928. Result is equal to Treaty of Yandobo is equal to Assam and Nagaland annexed plus Arakan, Tenasserim in Lower Burma annexed. Later in 1830, Kutch annexed. Coorg was annexed in 1834 and Coorg became the first coffee-producing area. First Afghan War, 1838 to 1942. Reason is equal to fear of Russia, that is, the northwest frontier. Result is equal to British established indirect rule in Afghanistan. Sindh was annexed in 1843. Annexations by Dalhousie, Sambhalpur in 1849, Bhagat in 1850, Udaipur in 1852, Nagpur in 1853, and Jhansi in 1854. Second Burma War, 1852 to 1953, annexed Pegu. In 1853, Barar of Hyderabad was annexed instead of subsidy under South Australia 1798. In 1856, the annexation of Awadh was on grounds of maladministration. No more annexations were done after the revolt of 1857. By 1857, India is equal to British India, direct rule of EIC, and it was 67% of the territory and 78% of the population, and the rest were 565 princely states, indirect rule via a policy of paramountcy. Revolt of 1857, 7:07 p.m. Question: What began as a fight for religion ended as a war of independence, as there is no doubt that rebels wanted to get rid of the alien government and restore the old order of which the King of Delhi was the rightful representative. Do you support this view? 1857 revolt is equal to Sepoy Mutiny plus civil rebellion uprising. Reasons, 7:17 p.m. The grievance of sepoys. Service-related. A. Discrimination between Indian sepoys and European sepoys in salaries and pensions. B. There was a focus on building a uniform military culture by the British and a decrease in financial expenditure, which contributed to the grievances of sepoys. C. To compensate for high war expenditure, there was a decrease in the salaries of sepoys. Plus, in 1856, there was an end of allowance for service outside their region, which caused grievance among sepoys. Socio-religious. A. There was high racism toward Indian sepoys, for example, were usually referred to as sewer pigs. B. There were Christian missionaries in barracks, which created fear of conversion among Indian sepoys. C. Since the 1813 Charter Act, there was a focus on the westernization of India, including the spread of Christianity in India. D. Also, British now tried to develop a uniform culture in the army, as it would lead to better control over sepoys, increased unity among sepoys over time, decreased loyalty to caste and religion, and increased commitment to the employer. E. There was also a rumor of mixing cow and pig bone dust with flour, and a rumor of cartridges of the new Enfield rifle that replaced Brown Bess musket, having grease made of cow and pig fat, and they were to be bitten off before loading. Political reasons. A. Awadh was annexed in 1856. Agrarian economic grievance. A. Sepoy was a peasant in uniform since he came from a peasant family and therefore was hurt by the loss of family land to the British government due to high land revenue and to the moneylender due to indebtedness. B. Also, now, the rural population joined, therefore Sepoy mutiny was followed by civil rebellion. Reasons for civil rebellion, 7:28 p.m. Feudal elements, Rajas nobility. A. Loss of kingdom due to annexations by the British by application of doctrine of lapse or taking over of Awadh on grounds of maladministration led to grievances among dispossessed rulers. B. These annexations were done in line with the policy of paramountcy. Examples: Satara 1848, Nagpur, Sambalpur, and Bhagat 1850, Udaipur 1852, and Jhansi 1853. Do lapse. Along with Nawab, the entire aristocracy was negatively affected. Therefore, these disposed princes offered leadership. Big landowners, talukdars, zamindars. A. Application of Mahalwari settlement in northwest provinces and Awadh led to the loss of land for talukdars, as in this system, land ownership in many cases was given to the actual cultivator, leading to loss of personal estates for talukdars. Therefore, it led to the loss of economic status. B. British focused on building a strong centralized state, and therefore, private forts and private armies of talukdars were disbanded, leading to a loss of military status. Now there was to be the rule of law under the British, that is equality before the law, which hurt their social status, and therefore, talukdars provided leadership to peasants. Artisans, peasants. A. Artisans were utterly destroyed by the British-made machines, as machines produced a cheaper and better quality product. B. Peasants' high land revenue and indebtedness to moneylenders, which lead to landlessness. Religion. The whole rural society had a fear that their religion is under threat. A. Since 1813, there was an inflow of Christian missionaries and there were forced conversions under police protection. B. The socio-religious reforms of the British, for example the Widow Remarriages Act 1856, escalated the fear that the British wanted to destroy traditional customs and religious practices. C. They gave the right of inheritance to those who converted to Christianity and therefore escalated religious conversions. D. British began taxing revenue-free lands of religious sects, mosques, and temples, and therefore, Hindus and Muslims both felt a threat to their religion, and Pandits and Maulvis spread hatred against the British among the people. There was a common feeling among the Indians that British rule is immoral due to all of the above-mentioned grievances, and therefore, the goal of the 1857 revolt was to restore the pre-British order, political, economic, social, and religious. Agents, 7:56 p.m. Sadhus and Maulvis were the agents of spreading hatred against the British. Topics for the next class: dictation of the Revolt of 1857. Modern Indian History, Class 16. 1857 Revolt, 5:02 p.m. On 19th March 1857, Mangal Pandey at Bharatpur at Calcutta fired at British officers, and his fellow sepoys refused to arrest him, and all hanged him. On the 10th of May, Meerut sepoys mutiny and reached Delhi on the 11th of May and proclaimed B.S. Jazar as Emperor of Hindustan. The revolt spread to other contentment in northwest provinces and Awadh, and the civil population joined. British rule collapsed from 11th May till the spring of 1858. Delhi was recaptured by the British only by 20th September 1857. Reasons for Sepoy Mutiny. Racism. Discrimination in salaries and pension. The highest post an Indian sepoy could reach was Subdar, which gave only 60 to 70 rupees a month. Racist slurs like Indians were referred to as pigs. Economic reasons. To compensate for high war expenditure, the salaries of sepoys decreased, and allowance for service outside their region ended in 1856. Socio-religious reasons. Initially, EIC recruited sepoys in line with Indian tradition, that is, upper castes were recruited and their caste and religious customs were respected. But as the empire expanded, different communities joined the EIC army. Therefore, difficult to respect the religious customs of the upper caste. British tried developing a uniform culture in the army as it would decrease loyalty to caste religion and increase loyalty to the empire, to have better control over sepoys. Therefore, EIC reduced caste privileges, like wearing religious symbols, food preferences, etc., and sepoys were forced to go abroad to Burma, Sindh, and Afghanistan, leading to caste loss. And those who refused were punished or dismissed. Also, since the Charter Act of 1813, there was a focus on the spread of Christianity, and Christian missionaries in barracks created the fear of conversion. The whole rural society has fear that their religion was under threat. Forced conversion and arrivals of missionaries. Socio-religious reform post-1801 escalated fears that the British wanted to destroy traditional customs like Sati abolition, Hindu Widow Remarriage Act, Eliexloki Act, Caste Disability Removal Act, Removal of Religious Disabilities Act. 1850 gave the right of inheritance to Hindu and Muslim converts to other regions. British began taxing mosques and temples. Rumors. Rumor of mixing cow and pig bone dust in flour. The cartridges of Enfield rifles replaced brown bass muskets having grease made up of cow and pig fats. These bullets were to be bitten off before loading. Therefore, sepoys feared that the British wanted to make them lesser Hindus Muslims for easy conversion. The revolt began in the Bengal army as high caste identity was still maintained, leading to more unity among sepoys. Political reasons. The majority of sepoys in the Bengal army were from Awadh, and nearly every family in Awadh sent a member to the EIC army. Annexation of Awadh was seen as a betrayal and hurt the loyalty of the sepoys. Agrarian reasons. Britsy did a summary settlement in Awadh that determined the land revenue demand without proper field surveys, leading to high land revenue demand. In northwest provinces, field surveys were improperly dealing with high land revenue demand. When peasants could not pay land revenue, they lost land in the government auctions. Peasants became indebted to moneylenders and then lost lands due to defaulting on loans. Sepoy was a peasant in uniform since he came from a peasant family, therefore his loyalty was hurt by British policy. Therefore, the issue of cartridges was only a trigger that gave voice to multiple grievances. Reasons for civil rebellion. Grievances of feudal elements. Loss of kingdoms due to annexation, like the doctrine of lapse, led to grievances among ex-rulers and nobility. Therefore, they offered leadership in the revolt. For example, Nana Sahib in Kanpur was the adopted son of Bazirao II and was denied a pension. He was assisted by Tatia Tope. Began Hajat Mahal in Lucknow, wife of ex-Nawab Wazid Shah, ruled in name of young son during the revolt. Khan Bahadur Khan, a Rohilla Afghan in Bareilly. Rani Lakshmi Bai in Jhansi, whose adopted son was not recognized as the next ruler. Kunwar Singh of Jagdishpur, Bihar, was a big Zmindar and local Raja whose estates were taken over. B.S. Zafar, as Canning announced in 1956, would now be called a prince, and he to vacate Red Fort and shift to humbler Qutub, therefore losing of status. Grievances of Talukdars. Application of Mahalwari settlement in northwest provinces and Awadh led to the loss of lands, estates as rights were made legal and owner, leading to loss of economic status. Their private forts were demolished and their private army was disbanded, leading to a loss of political and military status. British rule of law hurt their social status. Therefore, Talukdars provided leadership to the revolt. Peasants and artisans. Destruction of the handicraft sector due to cheaper machine-manufactured goods imported from Britain hurt artisans' livelihoods. Landlessness for peasants due to high land revenue demand and indebtedness to moneylenders. as they lost land in government action on non-payment of land revenue and lost land to money lenders due to default on loans that were given at very high interest rates. The new British courts supported money lenders, therefore money lenders also became targets during the 1857 revolt. The goal of the revolt was to restore the pre-British order. Reasons for the victory of the British in the 1857 revolt, 6:20 p.m. Sepoys lacked financial resources. Lack of modern weapons and training among peasants. British had better leadership and a strong centralized bureaucracy, army, and an effective communication system leading to efficient decision-making and coordination. Tactical mistakes as sepoys focused on coming to Delhi, therefore movement did not spread properly, and the defeat of Delhi meant the defeat of revolt. Lack of unified leadership on the Indian side as there were multiple regional leaders and no central leadership, therefore coordination suffered. Due to the localized nature of the uprising, British could defeat rebels one after other. The whole EIC army did not revolt, the Bombay and Madras regiments were quiet, while Punjabi and Gurkha actively helped the British. The civil rebellion was limited to mainly North and Central India, and mainly minor participation elsewhere. Was the 1857 revolt a war of independence? 6:57 p.m. The colonial view is that the 1857 revolt was mainly a sepoy mutiny due to their service-related grievances, and the civil uprising was nothing but mob violence due to the breakdown of law and order. However, V.D. Savarkar called it the Indian War of Independence and fought for Swadharma and Swaraj. Karl Marx also argued that it was a nationalist revolt. The mainstream stand is that it was much more than mutiny, but modern nationalism was not present, therefore not a proper war of independence based on modern nationalism. The whole of India did not participate, and those sections that benefited from colonial rule did not participate. For example, Zmindar of Bengal became a big landlord after a permanent settlement in 1793, therefore stayed loyal to the British. Those rulers who did not lose their kingdom stayed neutral. Western educated gained from jobs created by British rule and believed that British rule will modernize India. Talukdars who did not lose their estate stayed loyal. In Ryotwadi areas like Sindh, Coorg, Assam, and Bengal, right benefited as they made landowners. There was no proper planning and the revolt was spontaneous bursts. There was no modern alternative in form of democracy. Yes, modern nationalism was absent, however common enemy was there. Common hatred was there against disruption brought by British rule. That is a common feeling that British rule is immoral. A common fear of threat to religion. Sepoys' declaration in Delhi went beyond their selfish grievances and listed the following reasons for mutiny. There was high land revenue demand. Increased Chowkidar tax. Increase in unemployment of artisans and learned men. Toll tax for travelling on public roads. Decrease in the status of Indian ruling class. Therefore sepoys were fighting all Indians. The common goal of restoring moral order was disturbed by British rule. Hindu-Muslim unity was there with belief that Hindustan is for Hindus and Muslims. All agreed among rebels that Delhi should be the capital and B.S. Zafar as emperor. Rebels did not desire the dictatorship of an all-Indian monarch, that does not desire a 17th century unitary structure, but wanted decentralized polity with real power at the province level. Therefore desired a form of federalism. Rebels did not want the British not just out of their areas but out of Hindustan. Also this time there was communication between regional leaders. It was a movement of the masses and not of elites. Elites were forced to take up leadership in many cases by those who revolted like B.S. Zafar, Nana Sahib, and Jhansi Ki Rani. Therefore initiative was of the common man, and in many cases, peasants and artisans continued revolts. The main initiative was of sepoy, and he was a peasant in uniform. Therefore 1857 revolt was led by peasants. Why 1857 revolt is an important watershed in Indian history. 7:43 p.m. Political impact. British became distrustful of Indians, and authoritarianism and racism increased. Indians were now considered racially inferior and beyond reforms, and the British did not want Indians in senior positions, therefore did not want to share power with Indians. They wanted stronger control over India. However, this frustrated educated Indians who wanted a share in power, and this anger led to the starting modern nationalism-based Indian national movement. EIC was blamed for the mismanagement of Indian affairs, and public pressure in Britain increased in favour of ending absentee sovereignty. As the real sovereign, the British government ruled India through an agent, EIC. Therefore, Goi Act of 1858 ended EIC rule and declared Queen Victoria as the sovereign ruler of India with direct rule over British India and paramountcy over Indian princes. Therefore, Queen was now the Empress of India, and Mughal rule ended legally with B.S. Zafar being deported to Burma and pensioned off. Queen's proclamation of November 1858 promised religious tolerance and that India would be governed as per its customs and traditions. Therefore, spread of Christianity and socio-religious reforms took a backseat. The topic of the next class, administrative impact of the 1857 revolt. Modern Indian History Class 17. Political and administrative impact of the 1857 revolt, 5:03 p.m. The Governor-General of Bengal was replaced with a Viceroy. Administrative impact. Now there was a focus on effective policing and intelligence. 1860 Police Commission led to the Indian Police Act of 1861, which set up police structure and functions which continued till 1947 with little change. Indian Police Act of 1861. The State Police